Greetings all. On behalf of everyone at Datagaps, I would like to extend a warm welcome and thank you for joining us today. We are excited to have you with us for today's webinar on how Agentic AI is transforming BI validation. I am Ritvi Sarangi, Growth Marketing Manager here at Datagaps, and I'll be your host for today's session. Business intelligence has become the backbone of modern decision making. Everyday executives, analysts, and business users rely on dashboard reports and KPI to make strategic decisions. But one challenge continues to grow. How do you ensure every report, every dashboard, and every metric can be trusted? Traditional validation approach have served organizations well for years, but today's BI environment are fundamentally different. More data, more dashboard, more frequent releases, and significantly more complexities. That's where the conversation around agentic AI becomes incredibly exciting. Unlike traditional automation, agentic AI has the ability to reason, adapt, and take intelligent action, opening the door to a new generation of BI validation. And so today's webinar is all about exploring the shift. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping comments. First, we have muted all the mics to avoid unintended distraction. Second, we have a couple of poll questions coming up from time to time for you to answer. And if you have any queries, please type it in our Q&A section. We'll answer them all in the end of the session. On the panel today, we have Anand Rao, our VP of Marketing, and Nadeem, our Pre-Sales Manager here at Datagaps. And with this, I hand it over to Anand. The stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Ritvi. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We have an exciting session planned, and we are looking forward to your participation here. And as Ritvi mentioned, today we'll be talking about where BI validation and governance often break down and how AI can help teams build more trusted reports. So it's about the work behind all the trusted reporting, the checking of the calculations, the comparing numbers and source data, tracing where the numbers came from, reviewing those changes, and applying the same checks across many reports. So as we go through it, think about where your team loses most of your time. So here's the plan for today. We'll start with the main places where BI validation and governance break down. Then we will connect each problem to a Datagaps capability and show what changes when the work becomes more automated and repeatable. And after that, we'll move into a live demo done by Nadeem here. And we'll close with a checklist, key takeaways and next steps that you can take away from this webinar. So please keep one important report or metric in your environment as we go. So let's begin with the central question here. When do BI validation and governance break down? So problems often show up after report changes, moves, refreshes, or connects to new data. And a dashboard may still look right, but the numbers behind may have changed. These risks grow when executives, operations teams, or AI tools rely on the report. And in this section, we will review 5 gaps that make the trusted BI harder. So this slide is the roadmap for the problem. And the 5 gaps are connected so that it helps to read them from left to right. First, there's the language gap. So business logic often lives in the BI semantic model, while the source truth lives in SQL. So these two sides do not naturally check each other, and therefore there is a gap. Second, there is this data access gap. Report results and database results often sit in different tools, which leads to export and manual handoffs, leading to a gap. Third, there is this dependency gap. Teams cannot always see which reports, visuals, KPIs will be affected by a source change. Fourth, there is this interpretation gap. So a technical difference may show what changed, but it does not explain what matters. And fifth, there is this scale gap. One report at a time cannot cover hundreds of dashboards and models. And so the key message here is that finding the mismatch in data is only the first step. The harder work is understanding the calculation, connecting to the source, and tracing the impact, explaining the change, and applying all these controls everywhere. So let's dive into each of those five gaps. The first gap, as I mentioned, is the language gap. A dashboard measure may look simple on the screen, but validating it against the source can be very difficult. For example, a short DX measure, if you're a Power BI user, may depend on relationships in the model, other measures, calculated columns, page filters, visual filters, and other time-based logic that feeds into the business logic. So to check that measure in the warehouse, someone has to rebuild the same business logic in SQL. This is not just copy paste task. It takes a person who understands both the BI model and the source database. So in many teams, only a few people can do that well. So validation here becomes a bottleneck. It also becomes inconsistent because two testers may translate the same measure in two different ways. So the most complex measures are often the least tested because they take the most effort, obviously. So the risk is easy to miss. The source data may be correct, but the dashboard calculation may still show the wrong revenue, the wrong margin, or basically a wrong KPI. And so the goal is not just faster SQL. The goal is to remove this barrier between business intelligence logic and the source validation. The second gap is this data access gap. So report validation often begins with a long manual process before the real comparison even starts. So a tester may open the report, set the right filters, export the visual data, save it as a file, open a database tool, write and run a source query. And then again, repeat that, export those results, load both files into a comparison tool, line up those keys and data types, and only then run that comparison. So each step creates a chance for the two sides to stop matching for reasons that are not real data issues. So the report may use one date range while the SQL query uses another. The database may return detailed rows while the report shows totals. The report may have formatted the values differently while the database shows the raw values. Or the export of the report may be stale because the source data changed after the file was created. So these false differences waste a lot of time because they look like real failures. And when the numbers truly do not agree with each other, the same cycle repeats for every new hypothesis. So that makes report validation slow and frustrating. The third gap is the dependency gap. So a single visual on the report page can depend on many layers that are behind it. It may use fields, filters, semantic model measures, calculated columns, and refreshed pipelines. So the challenge is that different teams own different parts of the chain. A report developer may understand the page and the visual. A model developer may understand the measures and the relationships of those measures. A data engineer may understand the views, the tables, and the data pipelines. But no one may have this complete view from the visual all the way back to the operational source. So this makes any kind of change impact hard to answer. So before renaming one column, an engineer needs to know which models use it, which reports depend on it, and which visuals display it, which KPIs could change, and who needs to review that change. So, without clear lineage, teams rely on searches, old documentation, and memory. So that causes two problems. So, changes may ship without the full impact analysis done. And second, troubleshooting takes longer when a business user questions a number. The fourth gap is this interpretation gap. So many tools can detect differences between report versions, but detection is not the same as understanding. So a comparison may return dozens or hundreds of changes, pages added, visuals moved, chart type changed, labels edited, filters changed, measures updated, bookmarks modified, or any kind of values that have changed. So the problem is that all these may appear in one long technical list. So a small layout change can sit next to a rewritten revenue measure with the same level of attention. So reviewers then have to decide what matters while they are under time pressure. So the riskiest changes may not even be visible on the report. A filter can widen from the current year to all years. A visual may switch to a different measure but look the same. A field may change from average to sum. A report may point to a different semantic model. So none of these changes may make the dashboard look broken, but they can change what the report means. So that is why reviewers need plain language summaries and priority of what differences matter, and not just the raw difference. The fifth gap is the scale gap. So the first four gaps that I mentioned focused on validating one report or model well. But most companies, as you know, do not have just one report. They may have hundreds of reports, models, workspaces, and dashboards across several tools: Power BI, Tableau, Looker, AWS QuickSight, or any other platform. So a one-time process cannot keep up. It may work when you need to check one important report, but it does not answer these bigger questions leaders care about. So which report uses different versions of the same KPI? Which models contain duplicate or conflicting calculations? Which reports still point to deprecated tables or columns? And where is this risk concentrated? So which business unit should be fixed first? So manual consolidation makes this harder because each run may have slightly different rules, and that means results cannot be compared fairly. So over time, inconsistent definitions may still be hidden, and rechecking the whole environment later after the standards have changed gets delayed. So scale is the most painful during migrations. So whether you're doing a platform upgrade, or whether you're doing some cleanups of the workspace, or you're doing a governance review. And so when leaders need a reliable real estate wide, a complete a report wide, or complete view wide view, it becomes much harder. So this slide, to summarize, brings the five gaps together into one workflow. The sequence matters. First, teams need to understand that the calculation behind a metric. So that's the first one. Next, they need to connect that calculation to the source data and check whether the report number is correct. Then they need to trace those dependencies so that they know what change will affect or where a wrong value can come from. And after that, they need to prioritize what's changed so reviewers can focus on the items that affect business decisions. And finally, they need to apply the same controls across many reports and models, not just one asset at a time. So this is not about replacing skilled people. It's removing repetitive work that prevents these skilled people from covering everything they should. So a strong tester should not spend every release rebuilding the same measure in SQL. And at the same time, a strong engineer should not have to search by hand for every report that uses one column. So trusted business intelligence requires detection, understanding, tracing, prioritization, and consistent governance across the full reporting estate. So with that said, we have gone through the problems, the 5 problems. This section shifts to the solutions. So we'll take a look at how Datagaps as a premier validation and tool closes each gap and turns separate validation tasks into one controlled workflow. We will follow the same order: the calculations, the source comparisons, the lineage, the interpretation, and the scale. So as we move through each capability, notice the manual work being removed and the evidence being created at each step for the release, the reviews, audits, and any kind of follow-up governance conversations. So the first is the language gap. This closes when the validation starts from the measure itself. So instead of asking a person to read the business intelligence formula, rebuild it from scratch in SQL, BI Validator, which is our validation tool for business intelligence, can take the measure or calculation from the semantic model, DAX in the case of Power BI, and generate a source query for review. So this is important because the generated query is not meant to be a hidden black box. So the tester can then inspect it, refine the query, and then approve it. So this keeps the human in control while still removing a large amount of repetitive translation work. So once the team agrees that this query correctly represents that metric, it is saved and used as a regression test. That means that hard work happens once, not every release. So this also expands the coverage. Because measures that were avoided because they were too complex can now be tested more often. And the result is that one agreed translation of the business metric, and there are fewer delays caused by the availability of one specialist person. And you now have strong evidence that the dashboard number matches the source logic behind it. The second case, the data access gap, closes when the report and the source database can be compared in one place. So instead of exporting a report result, saving a file, running a separate SQL query, exporting again, joining the two files by hand, BI Validator connects directly to both sides. So one side is the live report visual or page result with all the filters applied. The other side is the database source using SQL or JDBC connectivity. So the tester can then view both results sets side by side and compare them on the same business slice during the same run. So this matters because many false mismatches come from exports, the stale files, different filters, and different levels of detail. So when both sides run together, the comparison is cleaner and easier to trust. So testers can also edit the source query and rerun that comparison right away. So that changes the work from a slow back and forth between different tools into a more focused investigation. So business analysts can participate more easily because they do not have to live inside a separate database client to validate this report. The third, which is the lineage, closes this dependency gap by showing how the reports, the models, the calculations, the source objects, and the refresh process all connect. So it's useful in two directions. So forward impact analysis starts with the source table or column and asks, if we change this, what will be affected? So the answer might include semantic models, the measures, the reports, and any specific visuals. And that turns the regression scope into a clear list instead of a guess. Going the other way, the backward root cause analysis traces starts with the visual or KPI that a business user is questioning and traces it back through the measure, the relationships, the query, the source table, and the entire refresh process. So that helps teams find the cause of any kind of wrong or missing values faster. And the same lineage map supports both use cases. It supports governance, and teams can notify the right owners before a change ships, test only what is actually affected, and keep the evidence where a report number came from. So this is especially important in regulated industries where, like finance, healthcare, or education, where teams need to not only prove that a number is correct, but it's also how it was created and how it was reviewed. And then the fourth one, the interpretation gap, this closes when the raw technical differences is turned into a clear summary. So the full comparison still matters to developers and other kind of details matter, but most reviewers and approvers need a different view. They need to know what changed, where it changed, whether it affects the number of people used to make decisions. So an AI difference summary can describe the changes in plain language, group them into different useful categories, such as any kind of cosmetic changes, structural changes, or data-related changes. So, for example, a reviewer can quickly see several layout changes have no value impact, while a changed revenue calculation or reporting period filter needs a deeper review. So this helps each audience do its job. Developers keep the detailed differences, testers get a shorter list of items to validate, approvers focus on the business impact, auditors get consistent change documentation instead of all the notes written by each developer. So the summary does not replace the difference, it adds the meaning layer that people act on the difference with more confidence. And lastly is this whole multiple analysis that closes the gap by turning repeated one report checks into like a portfolio level control. So instead of scanning one asset, exporting those results, and manually building a spreadsheet, teams can analyze reports, models, workspaces, and even different BI platforms with the same rules in one run. So that makes the results easier to compare because every asset is judged against the same standards and thresholds. Leaders can then see which reports or workspaces have the most serious findings, where defects repeat, and where KPI definitions conflict. So this is much stronger than saying a report feels risky. So it gives teams some kind of measurable evidence, such as the number and severity of the findings. And it helps prioritize the remediation by risk rather than whichever asset was scanned last. So this kind of capability is especially valuable during migrations or platform upgrades or some kind of workspace consolidation and governance reviews. So in these situations, leaders need a complete estate-wide baseline, and then they need to rerun the same checks after each change to show the progress with the facts instead of any kind of opinion. So now we have connected each validation gap to the Datagaps capability. And now the demo will make these ideas much more concrete. So as you view the demo, watch for these three things. First, how quickly the workflow reaches the source of a problem. And second, how much manual preparation disappears by using a tool like this. And third, whether the output is clear enough for both the technical and business users to act on together, and keep one high risk report or metric in mind and consider whether this kind of workflow will help you. So, Nadeem, over to you.
Perfect. So, for everyone, first of all, thank you very much for joining the session today. Anand has already highlighted and given us a really great overview about what are the major gaps and how data gaps with its BI validator capability comes in to fill these gaps. I believe one of the biggest challenges in all of these gaps is that in BI validation, in comparing what users see in a Power BI report with what's actually stored in the source data set. So being able to validate that becomes one of the biggest challenges. So we'll go through each of these, gaps, starting with the language gap and how and what are we really trying to do to fill that in the language of a practitioner. Really what we're doing is we are converting the DAX queries into SQL. And as you know, the BI Validator, which is an offering of the Datagaps organization, is a leader in the BI validation space. So we've already been doing validation, which is giving you ability to do pixel by pixel comparison of reports in different environments or report to data compare. But what we're doing now is we have identified this gap, and with this ability we are trying to focus on it. So let's go through the solution and see how can we deal with it. So for the purposes of validation, what we do as part of our solution is create these test cases. So I'm using this option of creating a test case, and within it what I would want to do is I would want to fill in a few prerequisites, which would be how my test case or data flow would be named. Now, specifically for the problem that I stated, which is I'll automatically use the solution to generate DAX into SQL, which fills that or bridges that language gap. That's what I'm trying to do. And this example is specific to Power BI. We can extend similar capabilities to Tableau as well. So I'm connected to a Power BI repository. I'm selecting a workspace that I set up for the purposes of this demonstration. And because what I talked about DAX to SQL, so this use case of this problem statement is really tying into a report to data compare, right? Now, in addition to that visual pixel by pixel comparison, BI Validator allows you to validate your data that can be extracted from a report to the data from its source of truth. So in this case, I'll be selecting data from a report from this workspace and compare it against its source of truth, which is from a SQL server. So in the next step, what we're doing is we are going in and seeing what are the different reports that are available for me in my workspace. I can select a particular page and from there go on to the step, which is where the magic happens. So the solution generates automatically DAX to SQL. And traditionally, someone has to manually understand the report logic and write an equivalent SQL query. Our DAX to SQL capability automates this process by extracting the DAX behind each visual and using AI to generate an equivalent SQL query. Now, before I talk about the benefits of it, you might be thinking, how are we doing this? So there are obviously a few prerequisites to this. First of all, some questions that you might be thinking about: where did you get this DAX query from? How were you able to extract it? Or how is really your solution generating DAX to SQL? We've been talking about agentic AI. So the first answer is, or the second answer is really simple. We are using AI capability, AI integration to do this conversion. But the first answer is even so more important, because within the BI validator, we have the ability to analyze your BI reports, analyze all the metadata behind those, and give you information about the data models, the statistics around how many pages, how many visuals are available as part of that report, whether the tables, the models are in use accurately or not, and then give you recommendations based on that as well. So this prerequisite, which is an already existing capability, is part of the BI validator, becomes essential to do anything like this. And that's why data gaps is unique in a sense that when we are talking about doing these validations, we are really, having the ability which would be required as prerequisites. So probably I skip this step. I'll, go back here, do this real quick again for all of you. So I'm selecting pretty much the same information that I did previously. And you'll see how quick the solution responds to whatever I'm doing, right? The selection, the generation of queries. So now you know that with the BI analyzer, I am able to get and extract all the metadata, all the information of where the DAX is stored. And that's why, I have this available. And that's why, I went, switch screens, switch modules, and showed all of that to you. So once the SQL is generated, the next step is really validation. And that's what we are getting into as well. And with that, what we have seen is how the solution is bridging the language gap for you. Now we are really moving into the data access gap, and how that's done, as Anand was highlighting, the solution allows you to do that report to data comparison in a single component. So that's what we are moving towards. So once a query is generated, you see that all of the data from the visuals from that page, which is part of a report, is now mapped automatically as well to the SQL data set, which will be generated. So with a few simple steps, we can proceed from here. Don't worry about the clicks that I'm doing. What matters more so is the how or the what that's happening over here. So the next step for me is pretty much to generate. And as I said, we are now into the data access gap bridging, focus area that Anand talked about. So with this generate, what has now happened is the validation test case that I talked about initially is also automatically generated. So I did not have to explicitly go into the solution and create this validation test case. With that process where we were trying to fill in the language gap, where I said to you DAX to SQL conversion automatically happens, now we have also automatically created this test case, which is really two different components combined to each other. And the differentiator here is the second component, which is newly introduced, which is a report to data compare. I'll go slightly deeper into it and show you what that is. But really quickly, let me show you the different components that are available. So our source components, which allow us to connect to any source, are reconciliation components, which are some of the most important ones, which you are seeing available here, which were automatically generated, right? So if I bring your attention to what's happening or what was automatically created, I'll open the report section. So this is really my connection to the report, which is my source to which, or rather my target, which I'm trying to, extract the data for and compare it against its source of truth. So the solution gives us the ability to extract all the data from these different visuals, which is now available to me here. So my visuals are available to me, or rather the data behind the visuals is available to me. And in this report to data compare component, which Anand talked about, filling the data access gap, allows me in a single component bring my data from the report and compare it to its source of truth, which we already discussed in the pre-steps, that it's SQL Server. So now I can side by side compare and preview the data for both the SQL and the DAX. And then the mapping happens automatically. So this is the mapping that happens automatically. And we can go to the result and see if we have identified any differences, if we have encountered issues. So if you see differences, that means your data is not authentic. But if you see, data like this where you are seeing matched records, there is a combination of data that match between your report to its source of truth. That's data that mismatch, which is inaccurate. Probably there are duplicate value as well. So this is how, in a single component, we were able to compare data coming in from different sources versus having to, as Anand highlighted earlier, manually extracting data from one place and then manually extracting data from its source and then doing a manual comparison. All of that becomes completely automated, right? So in this way, with these few steps in a few seconds, what we were able to do is we were able to work with and identify and understand how we were able to fill these two, or rather bridge these two gaps between the language and the data access. Now, before I talk about dependency gap, which highlights the end-to-end lineage capability of the solution, let's talk a little bit about the interpretation and the scale gap as well. So when our report developers or analysts are looking at these reports, and these issues are something that, as someone in pre-sales, I encounter every day, there's not enough automation to do report validations. Data gaps with the BI validator solve that issue long back with its pixel by pixel comparison. So this is not new what I'm showing you right now. The ability to do pixel by pixel comparison of reports by when they are in different environments was already there. But what's new with the integration with Agentic AI is to give you a clean summary of the report differences that automatically identifies differences across layouts, text, formatting, context changes, presents them in a simple, easy to read summary. Now, this is what reduces regression testing efforts and gives teams greater confidence before you can go to deployment. So if I click on this button which says AI report differences, this is what has enabled AI has enabled us with our integration with it, right? So there were some challenges which we already automated, which we already worked towards, but with Agentic AI now on our side and its integration, we are able to give you detailed summary reports, as I said, across text differences, across, if there's differences in color. So it might seem as color differences, but running the same report in test versus production, you want consistency. So you would want, even the minute of the things to be consistent across your environments. So this summary report is now available to you, which can be downloaded, and it serves that purpose for you as well. So with this, now I move into the next topic, which is the scale gap. As we were talking about the conversion of DAX to SQL, and I did talk about our ability to have the BI analyzer. One of the major challenges that large organizations would often have to manage is that there are dozens or even hundreds of Power BI models. Now, running analysis one model at a time is time consuming. So what we've introduced within our BI analyzer itself is the ability to do multi-model analysis. So this multi-modal analyzer allows user to analyze an entire workspace in a single run, and it keeps the metadata up to date through scheduled refreshes. Now again, goes back to what we talked previously. This not only saves time, but it also ensures downstream capabilities, which we discussed, like DAX to SQL always work with the latest metadata. So we are, with the new capabilities, also empowering the new capabilities that we are adding today. So let's now look at the multimodal analyzer and what we are doing over here with it. So with a few simple steps, what again I will be able to do is select a single workspace or probably multiple workspaces from which I want to bring the models for analyzing them. Now, as you see over here in this step, I have a total of 56 different models that are available to me. So if I want at one shot, I can put all of them for the purposes of doing analyzing them. So that's what this capability is all about. Now from here, I go ahead, I say create, and the solution will now take these models and analyze them not one by one, but what it will do is, and this is again a differentiator, we will run this in something that we call as pipelines. So think of these pipelines as automated workflows which can run on a scheduled basis, and that is why and how all the capabilities will be working with the fresh metadata which is up to date, because we are running it in pipelines on a scheduled basis. So from here I can click on run analyzer in pipelines, and the solution goes ahead and starts to take that action, starts to schedule it in our pipeline section. So if I quickly take you here, some of it, as you can see, is working on, but what I have already done as part of the preparation for this webinar is I can show you once something is completed, what you can look at. So in this case, you have different models available. As part of those models, you have multiple reports. We are, as I said previously, also extracting information about all of the metadata, all of the different report pages, how many pages are available in the report, give you details about each of the metadata in those reports. So there is a lot that you can drill down into one by one, step by step, after we've run these models for analyzing them in the pipelines, right? So it does that in a scheduled basis, in a scheduled manner. So with this, the gap number 5 around scaling is something how we've handled within the product. Now, as I said, I would be talking about the dependency gap towards the end, which is really the capability to look at end-to-end lineage. Now, the importance of lineage is something that I cannot emphasize enough on, and it provides complete visibility into how a report is built. So what we are also doing is we are tracing your data as it moves from its source to the actual semantic model and then into the report visual. Now, how do we do that? Obviously, first of all, we have the ability to connect to multiple sources. So it's not, when we talk about lineage, it's not just limited to BI technologies. It expands across sources, across our ability to validate ETLs. So that's why I am highlighting the different sources which range from on-prem to cloud-based, to our ability to have API integrations built into the solution. The first thing is, when we talk about end-to-end lineage, yes, we do have the ability to connect to multiple sources. The next thing is, once we've connected to those sources, what are we doing with that? We are documenting and bringing in the metadata information in our data catalog. So now from validation, it also slightly is leading into governance, which leads into BI governance as well, or the governance of our report, which leads through the lineage. So we document the metadata in our catalog, and we have a module which we refer to as the mapping manager. So this is where the magic glue is, because what it does is it's the document of the source to target movement. It's the document where all our transformations are also available So when we are giving our customers a visualization of their end-to-end lineage, we are taking into account the data movement across different layers and also what transformations were applied that should be traced when data moves. So if your report is affected because of a faulty transformation, you can trace that through our lineage capability, which, as I said, the mapping manager helps us to document end to end. So in this example that I'm showcasing right now, you can see that we have the ability to trace lineage all the way to the report visual from its source. And then if you look closely, we have the lineage available at the most granular level, which is the column level. So we are not limited in our ability to showcase lineage only at the table level. We go beyond that. We extend it into the column level lineage. We can emphasize and focus on what the transformations were in place. So if there's any issue in your report, which is occurring because of a faulty transformation, you get insights into that, and probably someone can be notified and they can work on fixing that issue. So I think with this, I have tried to cover the major gaps that we've identified and how data gaps comes in to bridge those gaps with the different capabilities. So Anand, I'll hand it over to you now, and I'll stop screen share.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, Nadeem, for this excellent demo. So let me share my screen to wrap up. All right. So the demo showed how these capabilities work in practice. So we can now then connect them to a simple operating model. So BI trust should not depend on a single person remembering to check a report. So teams need to do this in a repeatable way to validate those metrics, trace those numbers, understand those changes, and choose what matters and apply this control across the entire BI portfolio. So for a pilot, choose a report, a KPI, or a workspace, or a migration set of tables where trust and risk matter the most. So building this trust and governing your business intelligence with AI means more than finding those mismatches. So teams need to know if those dashboard numbers are correct, where they came from, what changed, which issues need attention first. So AI can connect the validation, the lineage, the change view, and the portfolio checks into one single workflow. And this value is the confidence. Business users can trust those numbers. The technical teams can find those problems faster. And the leaders see the risk clearly. And auditors, if you're in a regulated industry, can get the evidence of how the changes were reviewed. So with that, we will take questions now and go from there. So Ritvi, looking forward to the questions.
Great. Thank you, Anand. Thank you, Nadeem, for this very insightful session and for showing us a practical walkthrough as well. I hope everyone found today's session extremely helpful and came away with a better understanding of how Agentic AI is transforming the BI validation. We have already received some great questions through the chat, and we'll try to answer them as many as we can in time. But yeah, Anand, let's start with our first question. How should an organization rebuild confidence after people begin questioning its report?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm sure you have come here to this webinar after the business users have started questioning your reports and feel that there isn't sufficient testing of those reports. So as you could imagine, saying that the data is correct usually does not help convince them. So teams need to show how those numbers were created, how they were tested, how they were approved. So a good place to start is one important business numbers, such as revenue or customer growth. So identify where it comes from, who owns it, how it is calculated, and then you create this repeatable test that runs whenever the report changes. And Datagaps can help you do this by checking the dashboard results against the source data, testing how the data moves through those pipelines, and watching for any kind of quality problems over time. So this clear proof builds trust faster than any kind of reassurance. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Anand. I'll move to the second one. So how can companies support self-service analytics without losing control?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. I'm sure you're like a Power BI user in your organization, where there are like a lot of business users creating their own reports. And I mean, people should be given that freedom without, overly excessive governance. So, but business teams should be able to build these reports with clear rules. So these rules may cover all the approved data sources, the naming standards, the testing, and any kind of release steps. So think of all these things that I mentioned as guardrails and not roadblocks for their self-service capabilities. So Datagaps can then help these teams automate many of those checks across their dashboards and pipelines. So it creates those reusable tests so that each team can invent their own process. It gives these business users independence while helping all the leaders of the data analytics keep the reports accurate and consistent and easier to manage. So, yeah.
Great. That's good to know. And moving on to our next question, we have, how can organizations reduce risk during a major data migration or platform upgrade?
So, Nadeem, you want to take
Yeah,
that?
sure, Anand, Ritvik, I can take that. I mean, again, coming from pre-sales, this is what we run into every day. So what we've suggested clients, or what we've seen people who do this successfully, is they start with understanding the quality of their data. So if they know that the data that they're trying to migrate is good or bad, or they can take an action on that data before migration, right? That becomes really important. Also, in the process of migration, when the migrations happen, are they validating it? So what moved with the calculations, with the business logic that was in place, the transformations, did that movement happen correctly or not? Were there some miscalculations? Were there some data that was interpreted wrongly? So that validation also needs to be done accurately before the business starts using the data after migration, starts taking decisions on that data, right? So those are some things: validating your data after migration, ensuring your data quality is good. And in order to do all of that, come talk to us. What I'll say.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nadeem. And with that, we'll follow up with any remaining questions from our Q&A section by email. So once again, thank you everyone for taking your time and attending this webinar. If you want to have any of your questions specifically answered, or if you have any requirement which you believe we can help you with, please do reach out to us at contact@datagaps.com. You can also request a free demo by clicking on the button that you see on the screen, or scanning the QR code that you see on your screen right now. We truly appreciate your participation and look forward to seeing you at our future webinars as well. Have a great day ahead. Good night. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
For further questions, feel free to reach contact@datagaps.com. Scan the below QR code for free demo. Thank you.